Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose Cons. We are a podcast for writers by writers, and sometimes we feel like prose, and sometimes we feel like cons. Hi, I am your Ali, and I am your host.
You are
today.
our Ali.
You're our
All
Ali.
of our Ali.
I'll stick with that. Yeah. I am everyone's Ali, and I am your host for today's episode. Today, we're doing another focus on a particular show. We're doing a show deep dive, and we'll just use it to branch out into everything, wherever that may take us. I pitched this episode as The Bear and the Art of Successful Anxiety. But before we get into that, let's go around and see who's joining us today. We have Alex.
Hello, my name is Alex. I am a writer of fiction, science fiction, horror fiction, a little bit of literary, and most recently crime.
Haha.
I guess I write. I've been published in a
Guess
couple
you
of
write.
magazines. Yeah, I guess I write.
This is us feeling like cons, ladies.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
is very much a cons morning. Yeah, they've been published in the Precipice Fiction anthology, and also I've got my own anthology of short stories, Golden Hour.
And we also have Paddy joining us.
Hello, I'm Paddy Boylan. I am an editor, technical writer, sometime creative writer, and writing teacher. And I'm currently working on my short story for our next anthology. Volume 2.
Yes, no, I think we're all busy doing that. It's actually
Yeah.
fun that we're all doing it at the same time. I've
Very
just put
exciting.
my first 1,000 words down to my
Oh,
story
good
as
work.
well. So it's
Nice.
it's coming together. And that one's a fantasy. I love writing in fantasy, science fiction. Currently in film world, a lot of my energy has been in psychological horror and horror scripts. And I may as well mention this because in the past, month or so, the Metropius animation, the 20-minute animation short film, has weirdly gone viral, or in real time is still kind of going viral. And it's very,
Very exciting.
Yeah,
it's
that's excellent.
just
That's
very strange
cool.
to observe. This is a project that's been around forever. It has been sitting on YouTube for a year, but it's only now the algorithm gods have gone, we choose this, and
Yeah,
it's
wow.
suddenly getting eyeballs all over it. I think overnight another 3K views ticking up. That's what we're
Awesome.
kind of talking each night.
That's
Those are the
fantastic.
numbers. So yeah, it's crazy. The crazy momentum. So I know the producers are busy thinking of strategies how to take advantage of that momentum. I know I have to do some work on Metropius soon. That'll probably be my next work. I'm doing another pass of the Bible. So that's what I do. That's what keeps me busy. So, before we dive into the topic today, I just want to ask everyone the usual question. What have we been consuming, reading, watching, playing recently?
I've been recently playing. I finished a game called Subnautica, which is I know Paddy's played it. I
Yeah, I saw that
Probably
message you sent me about it. I haven't
I
responded
sent it
yet,
like
but it's
3
so
a.m.
good.
in the morning.
It's so good, man.
It is really good. It's quite story heavy for how freeform it is. It's basically just about you crash land on this planet. It's like an ocean planet, and you have to find all the materials and build your way to make a spaceship to get off the planet. And at the same time, you're discovering kind of what's going on about the planet, and it's very satisfying. There's a lot of collecting rocks along the way, but it's very, very satisfying.
But also a lot of really anxiety-inducing moments. Speaking of
Yeah.
anxiety,
Yeah,
talking about thalassophobia, it's
very terrifying. I
Yeah.
feel like that it would be a good way to cure thalassophobia, actually.
or make it profoundly worse.
Profoundly worse. Those Reaper Leviathans, man, they are terrifying.
Yeah, they
Ugh.
are.
What about you, Paddy?
I finally got around to watching Dairy Girls.
Hey!
Nice.
Wow. I get why it's talked about now. It's so effing funny. You know, a lot of the time I watch a comedy, I'm like, okay, that was all right. I see why people would find that funny, but I'm actively guffawing through most
it's great.
episodes. It's really, really good.
The nun character.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she's so good. Getting back from her judo lessons all the time. Jeez. And I'm reading my first manga ever, which has been I don't know if you know Tower Dungeon. It's a new one.
Oh, I don't.
It's kind of like a dark fantasy dungeon crawler. A friend of mine recommended. It's very good. Writing wise, it's nothing amazing, but I mean, I guess something manga can do so well is capture a vibe, and the vibe and aesthetic are so spot on that I'm really engaged in it. I'm
often
not
has.
reading any proper books at the moment, but I'll get back to that.
We don't always have to be reading proper books.
No, but it makes
we
me feel more
consume
like a writer.
story in many different forms.
Yeah.
We do.
I am currently reading, drumroll, Hyperion.
Nice.
Yeah. What do you think?
I'm halfway through the poets section,
Yeah.
and I fucking
God.
love
That's
it.
great.
Oh
Isn't the
my
poet
God.
great as well?
Such a character.
I'm laughing to the point I've cried
Yeah.
like twice
Oh,
in the
God.
poet section. It's laugh out loud funny.
Has he surgically turned himself into a satyr yet?
No, I
Okay.
don't know.
Well, you've got that to look
Oh
forward
my
to.
God. No, that the section in particular I'm thinking of is when he's on the mining world and he's lost all his language, so he can
Yeah.
only talk in 9 words.
and
then
all expletives.
and then it goes through several pages of like the most beautiful prose on what poetry means to him and what poetry means to the universe. And then he's like, I tried to turn and explain this to my cellmate and said, poo poo pee pee cock. And I'm guffawing.
Yeah.
Guffaring's the right word.
Yeah.
Just hysterical writing.
Yeah.
Look, the first section really hooked me. The second one was fine, and then
Mhm.
hitting the poet at the third one, I'm getting pulled through it at quite a wonderful pace.
Yeah. I was halfway through the sequel and I actually paused indefinitely. I don't think it's as good, which is such a shame because that first book is so good. And the second one,
Is it just 2 books or?
no, it's like 4, I think.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how our group kind of has these mimetic
Tomes.
tomes
Yeah.
that we go through.
Yeah.
We all went through the Moby Dick era, and then we went through the Wolf
The
Hall
Moby Dick
era.
era. Yeah.
I think Phoenix is he's the last to get up to Wolf Hall, but he'll get through it. And
Oh,
then,
good. He is reading that.
Yes.
I guess one of us finds one of these books and they rave about it so much
Yeah.
that the rest of us just like, well, I guess it must be good.
So I think I'm probably the last across Hyperion, but I'm loving it. I'm
Yeah.
loving it.
It's beautiful.
Let's dive into our topic for the day. Even if you haven't seen The Bear, that is okay. Bear being the TV show on Disney. I got it wrong a couple of podcast episodes ago. I think both Netflix and Amazon were credited with The Bear, but it is in fact a
Yeah.
Disney property.
Yeah, it's Disney.
It's all the same company, right?
It is just big monsters and mouse ears.
Yeah.
So yes, they've got 3 seasons out. We know that there's another season coming. We won't be talking too heavily in spoilers. Why I wanted to pitch this episode was more, this show is excellent if you haven't seen it.
Very
and
good.
it does some things particularly well. So my brain, I watch it and then I'm like, I need to immediately understand what techniques it's doing, how is it achieving this effect so well. So I just sat down and did all this dissecting, and now I'm excited to talk this out loud, share my findings, and see what other people think. But in general, I am interested in this idea of anxiety, quotation marks. And when we talk about that as a creative tool, what are we actually talking about? We talk a lot about tension. Tension is a word we throw around a lot. So to Paddy and Alex, I wanted to throw out this question. If I'm using the word tension, but then I'm also throwing out the word anxiety, do these things mean 2 different things to you? How do you interpret these 2 different terms?
Okay.
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah. So tension is kind of more all-encompassing. You can have all kinds of tension. You can have romantic tension. You can have, relationship tension between housemates. You can have tension in terms of like horror. It's really just saying like, this is a pause on what we're doing. We're not going to finish here. We're starting from here and we're going to a point. And this is the, in music, you'd call it a passing note. You know, you hear something go along and then you play this chord and you're like, oh, that doesn't sound right. And if you ended on it, it would sound really off, but then it resolves. So it's the point before it resolves. Anxiety is much more specific. Anxiety is basically this little thread of like, a bad thing is going to happen and it's just playing that out. Like, I feel like a bad thing's going to happen. There's a sense of dread that is there. Now, that actually doesn't necessarily need to resolve. I think that's a big distinction between it. You can thread anxiety through, it's almost more a vibe. I used the word dread before, but it's this underlying, like almost heartbeat right? And it can get bigger, and you know, and it definitely does that in the bear, and it gets smaller. But it's this pervasive sense of almost like fear. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it tension. Does that make sense?
Does. Yes. No, I love this as kind of a nebulous idea. So I'm excited for all three of us to have a different take and kind of find the truth somewhere in between all three of us. So Paddy, when you hear these two different terms, how do they resonate with you?
I guess much similar to Alex, tension it's a broader catch-all for writing. Every book has tension. Every story has tension, or at least practically every story does.
It should have tension.
Probably. Not every story induces anxiety. So I see tension as the promise that something will go wrong. Could go right. The promise that something will happen. And the tension is that space before the thing where there's that, we know it's coming, but it's not there yet. And it's kind of that feeling a lot of the time that makes us interested in the story. We know something's going to happen, and we want to be there for the payoff. And anxiety is, why are you laughing, Alex?
I'm just thinking of the Simpsons episodes, like, oh, you know, with the mafia when they like come together and fight. And he's like, but that little guy hasn't done anything yet. That's tension.
Yeah,
and then you're like,
that's tension.
It's like, oh, and that was the result.
And the not seeing it actually makes it all the more perfect. Yeah. Actually, you know what? I'm done. That illustrates my point better than anxiety is more the immediate feeling. It's more the immediate feeling of dread. And tension doesn't always make you uncomfortable. Anxiety does.
Yes, that's a good take on it. When I was thinking about these terms to myself, tension, I agree, is something we expect in all stories, and I think all stories are improved by having more tension. Tension to me it's just the presence of conflict. It can be two people are in conflict, two ideas can be in conflict, just a person versus an environment can be in conflict. And whatever that is and however it manifests, tension is the result of two opposing forces, or more forces can also increase the tension. While anxiety for me is, we're now very in particular talking about the audience, it's the feeling we want to inspire in the audience. So if tension is happening within the story, anxiety is the outcome. This is what it is, that ongoing dread. It is this
like tone versus mood.
Yeah, it's this unsettling feeling we want to inspire, always be present. I like how you use that music metaphor, Alex. It is just almost like an unsettling, dissonant chord that is always there, and that's what's being felt by the audience. When I think of shows or books that inspire anxiety, I think back to a couple of years where Nathan and I sat down and watched Years and Years, or we tried watching Years and Years. We didn't get many episodes into it. It's a British show. Essentially, rewind back to Trump's been in power for like a year and a bit. And this was a show, a few shows were coming out at the time that were a reaction kind of to this politic. It was before we got Succession, because Succession in my mind was kind of the ultimate show that then came out and summed up that whole era quite well. Now, I know you don't like it, Paddy, but it's brilliant. Did you get all the way through it?
No.
Well, then save your ears for when you finish it.
No, I'm good. I know what it's about.
Years and Years came out before Succession, and it was a British speculation because, you know, the Brits were going through their own version of that politic at the same time. So it was a British version of, what if we had our own kind of Trump came into power and the world went insane. And it was almost a little bit too real. So where the characters in Succession are a little bit clowny, they're a little bit larger than life, and you
Not
can
very
kind
well
of
written.
Very well written. But you can sit back and you can kind of have an arm's length distance. I've completely forgotten what that phrase was.
Arm's length.
Arm's length distance from these people and watch these awful people. Something about Years and Years where you're like, this is too real.
Yeah.
Nathan and I turned to each other after a couple of episodes, and I'm like, I genuinely can't do this. Like, having Trump news on my feed and then watching this show at the same time was just hitting something inside of me where I'm like, we can't watch this show. We have to drop it. At the end of episode, I feel anxious in a bad way, and I'm not enjoying it. And so we did not finish it.
I agree that it was anxiety inducing. It gave me a similar feeling to 1984. And I think part of it, same with The Bear, is because of just how real it was.
Mhm.
It was so believable. If it hadn't been, I don't think it'd be as anxiety inducing. And because the bear as well is just so real.
Mm.
Yes.
Places you right there. Yeah, there's something about that.
We started using the term anxiety porn
Mm.
when Years and Years was the show that made us go, what is it? What is this show doing? And we're like, well, it's doing this so deliberately. It very
Yeah.
clearly wants the audience to feel this way unapologetically. So we called it anxiety porn. So throwing this question to the two of you, 1984, it's a great example. Would you say that was good anxiety or bad anxiety you felt?
At the time I read it at a pretty young and anxious age, I actually stopped because I found it too dreadful.
Yeah.
It's something about it really frightened me. So bad anxiety.
Bad. Yes. Okay.
But that's no fault of the author, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant book, and
Yeah.
I'll pick it up again one day.
Yeah.
What about you, Alex? Have you come across any anxiety porn?
Yeah, well, I was going to say Succession actually is a perfect example. Look, I'd say probably Peep Show, who's actually written by this. It's actually written by the same guy. Is that same thing? It's that same clownish, like, oh, how can you be doing this? I call it cringe porn, which is I think the same thing. But what's it called? The Larry David one.
Curb Your Enthusiasm. I was
Curb Your
actually just
Enthusiasm.
thinking of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
It's
mum won't
just-
watch it because she finds it too awful.
Yeah, I've tried to watch it a couple of times and watch it, and then came back to it and be like, no, I get this, but I don't think I could watch much of it. Like,
Oh, I love it. I
it's
love it. But
brutal.
it definitely, it gives you that
That
feeling of
ick.
like, oh God, what are you doing? No,
Yeah.
stop. So yeah,
Well, that's interesting because I would split hairs between cringe and anxiety.
I think you're right,
Because
actually.
cringe is in comedy and like the famous Office episode of like Mike's Tots. Is that it? It's the Office episode where we find out that like a decade ago he promised all this money to this graduating class of kids if they all successfully graduated. They're like from a poor area.
Oh my god.
So Michael's been this figure that's inspired them all the way through their schooling, and like
Oh
now
my
they're about to
God.
graduate, and he just has to rock up, and he's happy to be the hero and receive all the accolades, but he's clearly doesn't have the money,
Oh my
and
God.
he can't give them all the money he's promised, and it's just the train is heading towards the wall. So yeah, Mike, I think it's Mike's Tots is a very famous episode for being unbelievably cringe.
Yeah,
And people can't. I remember watching it like with my hands over my eyes. But in terms of and then Frasier's very good at the cringe, while anxiety for me is more that just existential, unpleasant feeling. It's not cringe because sometimes the bear does do cringe. Sometimes
Yeah.
that gets my hands over my head as well, but they're fleeting moments.
It's maybe more consistent. I think the consistency is something, but it's like this underlying perpetual thing, and it's like highlighted sometimes. So the thing I really, really like about the first season specifically, I can't remember if they did in the second, they might, but I don't think, is when they get that crunch time and they use this very specific song called New Noise by The Refused. And me and Paddy know that song from way, way back.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
big fans of that
I
song.
was so happy to hear that song.
Yeah, and the fact that it keeps using it, and it becomes like this mimetic, like it's almost like a Pavlovian thing that, like, when you hear this song in this context, like, you know, you get
It's on.
It's tense. Yeah, exactly. It's on.
Yeah.
And that's like a perfect example of like, hit the anxiety button now, and it makes you feel that. You really feel like, wow, it's
Yes,
it's
it
on.
does.
Okay, so pitching this question then, what is the difference between good anxiety and anxiety porn? Ones that are probably doing it over the top to the point we do not finish. Bringing it back to us as writers, how can we avoid making something, we're scaring the audience away with too much anxiety?
All right.
Yeah.
I've got an example for this. So this is a personal opinion. There's a lot of people who really like this show, but I started watching Ozark. Is it Ozark or Ozarks? I think it's
Yeah,
Ozark.
Ozark.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I think the premise of Ozark is really, really strong, right?
Yeah.
It's like a man gets into financial debt. It's not really dissimilar from Breaking Bad in a sense.
Yeah.
He gets into financial debt with a bunch of mobsters, and he's like, I got to go to the Ozarks and launder all this money for them, or I'm going to be killed. Now, that's a really good premise. The problem is, it kind of goes on for like 4 seasons, and unlike something like Succession, where they have these like, oh, it goes, and Paddy, I know that you know, this doesn't apply to you.
I know you're all mad. It's
like,
fine.
whatever, this show sucks. No. Anyway, so opposed to a Succession where it sort of goes like that, and then it'll dip, and you're like, when they go, oh, you know, and then it's scary, and then it'll do the big thing at the end of the finale. I actually haven't seen the last season, so please no spoilers for that. And then it'll be like, oh no, how are we gonna like? There's this thing. Ozarks just does this. It just does that the whole time.
So Alex was drawing an upward slope.
Yeah. So it's instead of being this sort of linear thing that's kind of waving its way up, and sometimes it's down, sometimes it's up. It's just a straight line. Like there's almost no point where they're like, oh, okay, well, you've managed to like get rid of these two people who are stopping you from, I don't know, like building a casino on a like a steamboat or something like that. I can't remember. It's been a minute ago. But immediately, this is twigged this other thing about another mafia crime syndicate. They're like, oh no, what are they doing? So it's like there's no chance to let up. There's no like, you know, and it's just exhausting. I got about the two seasons through, and it was just like, you can't do this like for that long. Another thing I would say is, and I don't want to hog the airtime too much here, is that I bring this up a lot. In a lot of horror novels, you'll have this first part that's really, really anxiety producing. And the bit I would specifically reference would be probably Dracula, the first little bit of that, where it's the letters between with Jonathan Harker sending stuff out. And basically he sort of goes through being trapped in Dracula's castle, and the tension ratchets up and up and up and up and up until at the end there's this sort of cliffhanger where Dracula's like, well, you know, if you can go outside, but you're going to be eaten by all these wolves. And it kind of ends there. And then the rest of the novel kind of takes this other track where it goes up much, much slower. So it's this sort of secondary arc that happens after the first primary arc. So that's kind of a way of doing it. Basically, you have to give the audience some time to relax, is what I'm saying.
When you mentioned Ozarks and how it doesn't really let up for very much time, I would actually agree with that. I didn't notice at the time of watching Ozark, but compare it to Breaking Bad, where everything's on fire, everything's going wrong, but actually then it becomes okay.
Yeah.
And Walt gets to enjoy family time.
Yes.
And we're actually like in these nice moments of the show where we can almost fool ourselves into thinking like, and everything's fine from now out. And Walt doesn't have his cancer and the family's happy, but then it all catches fire again.
Yeah.
And you're right that Ozark doesn't do that as well. And also right that that's actually probably something we want to do in these anxiety shows, is actually give some time for the tension to release, which The Bear does well.
Yes.
But as to how much is good and how much is bad, I don't know that we can boil it down to like, this is good, this is bad, because there's different. So when I was researching this, I was on Reddit, and a lot of people were saying about The Bear, I had to turn it off. I couldn't watch it because the anxiety was too much all the time. Whereas I love The Bear because like it's too much all the time.
Yeah. So it is very
it's very personal and tasty.
Yeah. I didn't find that. I didn't find it was
you
like
didn't find The Bear anxiety inducing?
No, I did, but not to the point where like, oh, I can't do this. Like after a season of Succession, I had to take a break. But like The Bear, no, I was like, yeah, that's great. It felt like the perfect, like, you know, there's the uptime and the downtime. Like when it's bad, but like
someone I saw online actually said that they had a panic attack halfway through the first season.
Yeah, feel for that.
Yeah, so Nathan and I love The Bear, and we could watch it all. But yes, maybe there were some episodes, and I'll talk about this, the mother episodes.
Oh, God.
Where you get to the end.
Like a movie.
And you need a break. You need to.
Yeah.
But our housemate, who asked me to always refer to him as Dr. Bradley Gooding on the podcast, he similar. I think it's season 1. It's the episode where Sydney has her very bad episode where she's like, no, I can do this, and she ends up dropping something from a top shelf and just spills everything and makes a mess. And that's like the end of the episode. That's been at a big climax of like her own panic attack, really. And that's kind of when Bradley's like, nope, I don't need to watch this show. I'm done. There's enough stress in my life. I don't need to watch The Bear for recreational reasons. What is recreational about this? Well, Nathan and I are like, yes, plug it into our veins.
Yeah.
So it is such a fine line, I guess, if you are attempting a show that does have anxiety built into its engine. You just, I guess, you got to accept you're going to be alienating some part of your audience for different reasons.
Yeah, I think it's a psychographics thing. Like, I think there are some people who are, I have the theory that people who are naturally more anxious will probably gravitate towards shows like that because it's a feeling that they're used to and they can relate to. I know for a fact that I get anxious all the time. And I think people who are chill I mean, I'm sure some like it, but like they'd just be like, why would you submit yourself to that? And it's like, oh, well, it's just how it is sometimes. It's nice to see that reflected in media, I think, and it's exciting as well.
It's the same reason I advocate for horror in children. It's
Yeah.
like a safe way to simulate those emotions,
Absolutely.
and experience them.
Absolutely.
But I guess it just depends if you want to simulate anxiety. Is
Yeah.
it the right time and place in your life to
And
do that?
to what level? Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm going to push us towards now. We're going to deep dive into the bear. We've kind of talked about anxiety, shows that do anxiety. Let's pick apart the techniques now that I think it does really well.
Let's dissect the bear.
We're going to dissect the bear. So both of you feel to jump in and add to this, but we're about to go through Ali's list. I'm starting with the obvious one. As a film technique, it uses obviously volume really well. It can be loud, there can be fast cuts, and narratively, the stakes, should they fail every episode, are made really intense through the cinematic tools of there's lots of, when it wants to, it'll do slow editing, and it'll really take its time. But when it wants you to be like, all right, this is now an intense moment, high energy, it can be very loud, lots of yelling, and lots of cuts. So that is just I think that's one of its easier crutches. And I think lots of shows do that. It does that, but it's doing other things that really, I just wanted to get the obvious one out of the way.
On that point, and you may bring this up later, but I think it's something that is overlooked in this show is the fact the episodes are only half an hour.
Yes.
They don't feel like that either. It feels like an hour-long family drama, with the exception of the mother episode, obviously. They feel like there's so much packed into them. And I think it's a real strength of it, the fact that they only go for this half an hour. They are
half hours.
Time.
Agreed.
Yeah,
they're incredibly powerful half hours for everything they pack into them.
Jam-packed.
So the world is very small. I think it does this incredibly well with a tight cast. There's no revolving door of cast characters, really. It's your set pieces are given to you from the start, and that's as big as your world is. And also physically, the restaurant, the location, especially in season 1, is very small, and it leans into this as much as it wants to. It milks this idea that this is such a small enclosed space. It's part of the restaurant experience. I did 4 years working in a restaurant that was also cramped, and you're telling people that you're now running with a knife, please get out of the way, and I'm walking through with a hot pan, and it can be all the OH&S, the small tension and drama that is associated with hot, dangerous things in a small, cramped space is taken advantage of incredibly well by the bear. The other one I had was always reminding us of unresolved tensions. And I think you brought this up well, Alex, the idea that, again, with your music metaphor, you introduce the tension is the 2 notes or the chord progression that's not yet resolved, and purposely not resolving it. And especially in the latest season 3, I know the 2 of you haven't seen it, but it will purposely be like, hey, we've set up that this discord exists. This is not in harmony, and they're not going to resolve it. And I was actually really impressed with how masterful that is, because I think we're used to this natural rhythm in a lot of narrative where you set something up, it escalates, there's an obstacle, and then you resolve it. And as an audience, we get to be like, hey, that's how stories go. The bear wants to do something much more reflective of real life, I think, where it's like, hey, these 2 people are annoyed at each other. And so I'm specifically talking about Kami and Richie here. They've had a big fight. They're not talking to each other. They're 2 men who don't know how to talk, so they're not going to. And therefore, this thing's not going to be resolved. And that's very realistic. They're just going to hold on to this grudge. And it keeps reminding us of that it is unresolved. And I thought it was doing that incredibly every episode would touch this beat again. It's like, this tension is unresolved.
Yeah, right.
You understand the psychology, and you're like, that's incredibly realistic why it's not going to be resolved. And I'm going to keep coming back to your music metaphor because that was so good, but just it keeps hitting that note again. That
off chord, just like
why? Because we keep expecting it to be resolved. We're so used to narratives doing They were like, just complete the progression, do the final step, and it's
like
refusing.
a bit of glass or a thorn in you. You're just like you feel it.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a bit of glass in your shoe, and it
Yeah, totally.
keeps telling you that it's there. And it's not just the one thread. With Nat's pregnancy as well. You know, that's kind of a ticking time bomb in the
Yeah.
narrative. And being realistic, you can't rush that. A pregnancy goes for a certain amount of time. It's just got to keep reminding you every episode she is pregnant, and it's still here. It's still a drama. It's still a tension. So it's that unresolved threads that I'm just like, oh, you just keep hitting these notes like those bell chimes. It's just like dung dung dung, and you're just like, ah, there's so many unresolved things. So that I think it does very, very well. And then the mother technique. So what I think is happening here when I'm sitting down being like, why are the mother episodes so incredible? Why do they make us go, that was intense? Like, as soon as I said mother to both of you before, you were like, ah, we all felt it. We were all flashback to that moment. And I think what it's doing is it's playing with contrast, and it sets up this false ceiling of tension. Or if we're thinking of like a dial, it will use the seasons to be like, say we have a dial set at 9, and it keeps telling us that the peak of tension, the very peak of the episode, is this 9. And so we're going like this. So as an audience, we're like, 9 is the top of the hill. Nine's the ceiling. That's as tense as this show goes.
Yeah.
And it saves 11 in
This one goes to 11.
It's like secretly waiting for the mother, and then it'll dial up to 11.
Yeah.
It's like this rule of the writer's universe that it's like we can go to 11, and we're only going to associate it with this character. So it breaks this ceiling that as an audience we got lulled into. Yeah, no, I know how intense this show is. I'm used to what their 9 is. I can handle it. And then they're like, fuck you. Here's the mother character's here, and she could go to 11. And there's something about that expectation and breaking that expectation I thought was, because they do it. There's at least one mother episode a season, I think. Maybe she's not in season 1. I can't remember.
She's not in season 1, I don't think.
No, so it's season. No, because
they
do it in season 2.
Because I remember seeing Jamie Lee Curtis and being and like not even recognizing her. She acts it so well. It's such a phenomenal performance as well. She does such a good job with it.
Okay, there's 2 mother episodes then. There's one in season 2, one in season 3, and it's the same you're like, it's almost you get lulled into the same expectation. You're like, I've experienced the mother again. Okay, I'm okay. I know what a mother episode is, and then and then it only goes to 9. It goes to 9. It goes to 9. And it's like, ha! You've forgotten what 11
Gotcha. That's good.
Did either of you have any thoughts on that? Are there any other techniques you can think of that the bear does?
Yeah, the characters are all really anxious all the time. The characters themselves are all perpetually on edge. Sometimes they'll yell at each other, but it's never like the full-blown, this is going to get it all out. This is going to either break our friendship or make it yelling. It's like the kind of yelling where you just need to get someone off your back momentarily, and then they go back into that tension. There's always that simmering, not dislike of each other,
animosity.
But the tension never gets resolved with the characters. They never explode in a way that's permanent. And watching stressed people in that hotbox kitchen for 30 minutes an episode is just really anxiety-inducing. So it's also, I guess, the performances is also how the characters are written.
Oh, yeah. The performances are so, like, Jeremy Allen White does that, like...
Who's Jeremy Allen White?
He's the bear. He's like the main guy. Right? He does that. He's just got this look. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Just that, okay, this is happening. I have to deal with this. And like, it's this thing. He won't, like, obviously not looking at the camera. He's looking away, and you can just see him sort of like, the head's a little bit raised. He's like, okay, like the eyes are wide open. And it's just,
he's just keeping it together. He's only just keeping it together.
It's just this masterful performance of him being like, this is me dealing with this in the absolute only way I know how to, which is just by keeping a fucking lid on everything.
Half an hour of that every single episode. It's so good.
Yeah, and very occasionally he blows his top, but most of it is like that simmering anxiety, that simmering tension. Like I think we should say that anxiety is a subset of tension. It is tension itself, but it's not. Tension's a big word. Anxiety is a specific form of tension. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. It's both anxiety and tension in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've got one final technique to pitch at all of you. This is the one that I've been like, what is this show doing? because I'm like, we've named all the really obvious ones, and they're all working together really well.
It's the
but
secret sauce.
the one that I'm like, I think the show is doing something really special I haven't seen before. And this is me trying to now hone in on what it is. So I'd be interested in feedback if you guys agree.
Okay.
So we never quite have full context. We never quite know everything the characters know. And I think that arm's length creates anxiety. So sometimes we are told many things about these characters, but we're not always shown, which is fascinating because it's breaking the rule of show, don't tell. There's actually quite a lot of telling going on. And it's because we never have the proof. So the examples I'm talking about is almost in season 1, we're told Kami is a masterful chef. He's at this level.
Yeah.
But we never actually really see it.
Yeah.
And same with Sydney's qualifications. We're told like Kami believes in her and hired her. So you're like, oh, she must be good. But it's not like we get any other real world evidence. There's no proof.
You have to
It's
take it on
always
faith.
it's faith from characters, and I'll get into this, but they're not reliable sources of information themselves. The only facts we're getting are opinions of other characters, but we as the audience don't get that like expositional proof. And because of that, we're always on this unsteady ground. And what the show, by doing that, allows things can go wildly different to what we expect, because we never truly know the truth of what is real and what's not. For example, I don't want to spoil it too much, but season 3 ends with this a really important review. And it pretty much ends on a cliffhanger of Kami's about to read the review and the episode ends. And we don't know is it going to be a good review? Is it going to be a bad review? And as an audience, as a writer, I'm like, I truly don't know going into next season if it was a good review or a bad review. There's no way of knowing because we've never really been given proof. Is the restaurant good or bad? I'm like, it can truly go either way because all of the information we've been given is subjective. It's subjective exposition. And when that kind of clicked for me, I'm like, that's so fascinating. It's like, I can't work out which way this is going to go because none of the information at any point has ever
It
been
doesn't confirm or deny.
revealed.
Yeah.
So some other examples, what have we got? Never letting other people enjoy the food. So we get a lot of the food prep. And then within the kitchen, they pass it off to each other and they're like, oh, yeah, that's fire. And so, like, Kami will cook something, Sydney will taste it, and Sydney will reassure him that it's good. And he's like, great, we'll send it out. But it never closes the information loop
You never see the audience. See
someone
the
external.
patrons.
A patron enjoying it.
That's really true. I'd never heard of that.
And a patron going, this is amazing. And we do get to see like all the locals come and eat the sandwiches when it's still in like the sandwich shop mode. But you're like, that's, these could just be people who live down the block and they're not about to try a new sandwich shop anytime soon. It's not like they're all lining up because it's more out of the sense of loyalty and community, not because the food's actually good. It's missing that proof. And the other example was, again, Sydney in season 3 gets offered this really big job. And I remember Nathan and I turning to each other and we're like, is Sydney actually worthy of some kind of job offer like that? And we're like, we've seen her be the most competent person under Kami and sometimes more competent than Kami in terms of managing this one little restaurant. We've seen her manage 5 people, but we also see her fuck up a lot. And I'm like, I don't know if I would offer her a job of this magnitude. And it struck me, we just haven't seen the evidence, the external evidence of how good Sydney actually is. It's unreliable exposition. So I'll deep dive into this a little bit more. If we think of what the camera shows us as a narrative voice, as if it was a book, I want to argue that the camera in The Bear is an unreliable narrator. And that's fascinating. It only shows us certain things, and that warps our view of what the characters are and aren't capable of. So we are never sure of what the outcome of their trials are going to be. It's just this wonderful sense that it's warping our perspective. We don't actually have true knowledge of what they can and can't do. And So normally I would hate this technique, I guess is where I'm going with this. Because what it makes me think of is in mystery novels, there's the type of mystery novel where they give you, say, all the pieces. So you as the reader can solve it yourself alongside the detective. So for the sake of this podcast, I would call that reliable exposition because you have been given everything you can do and you can feel smart as a reader as you solve it alongside the detective. But then there's the other mysteries where they don't give you all the pieces and then Sherlock manages to magically solve it. And the technique it's going for is Sherlock seems really impressive. Sherlock's smarter than you because Sherlock managed to solve this when you, the reader, couldn't. When in actuality, it's unreliable exposition because you literally haven't been given all the pieces. You couldn't solve it. There was no way the narrator of the novel was ever going to let you solve this. Only Sherlock could. So I believe the bear is actually doing this technique, but it's not being done to make the characters look smart. It's being done to create anxiety in the audience by keeping us always on certain ground, always having a warped view of the world. And that's, I think, what's causing this. What is going on at a really subconscious level? So that's kind of what I landed on. So what are your reactions to that?
So what you're essentially describing there is portraying it from the mentality of the characters themselves. You know, like it's reflective of almost their because let's be real, like both Kami and Sydney don't have a whole lot of self-esteem, and that because of that, they do work really hard to do these things. So I view that as the camera and the perspectives way of communicating that. We can, like you said, we can only assume that they are talented because this is what has been implied by, you know, some external context, although certainly not all, right? So I think the way it's able to do that is basically it comes down to the sense of scope, the sense of it being very small. I think that's really important. And only like filling in like minor detail, like the fact that there's so little there to sort of describe and make use of essentially gives them that canvas to be like, okay, cool. Well, we can see this, but we're not seeing any of the external stuff. They don't, it's not like they show you like, it could very easily pan out to some random person and be like, oh, wow, this restaurant looks amazing. Best filet mignon I'd ever eaten. That's like, you never get that. It's all a part of it, this claustrophobia of being within this world, these like literally initially 5 people and just like figuring that out. And then also that in media res sense of like, I guarantee you next season when it comes out, they won't bring up that review straight away. Like you'll get there within a few minutes, but it won't be the first shot. No way.
And it'll be a really mixed review.
Yeah, maybe.
It will.
Yeah. So that's what I'd say. So the sense of really being from the character's perspective, the sense of the smallness of the world, and then that in media res, like just keeping it. It's like if it were a book, it would be. I almost think it would be like definitely present tense, maybe first person swapping between. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just got that immediacy to it, which I think is that. So that would be my groping take at it.
I think you might be onto something with that, Ali. It really reminds me of, I don't think it's a coincidence that the writers are all creatives and they're writers, but it reminds me of the uncertainty around the creative process. You can write a story, we've done that, and you think it's good and you hope it's good, and the people around you are telling it's good, but really you don't know until it gets a wide audience. That's what I thought of when you were saying that. The Bear is full of that. They all think and hope that they're good, but they've all got this niggling doubt that like, maybe I'm terrible. Maybe I'm really, really bad. And that itself is, being writer sucks. That itself is such an anxious place to live in. That feels like kind of what they're tapping into there.
Yeah, and that additional context that Alex and yourself have just articulated, that the warping of information being rooted in character psychology, that these are anxious characters.
So anxious, so filled with self-doubt. That's not a coincidence.
The self-doubt that they genuinely don't know they're good. Therefore, the camera cannot communicate. Are they good or not? Because that's almost the question at the core of themselves. And that's so fascinating. It's a completely different show for many different reasons, but it made me think of Yuri on Ice, which is an anime about ice skating. But it's I've watched that too many times to count, but say on a first run, you don't pick up on the unreliable narrator. But if you rewatch it, the early episodes are actually a textbook unreliable narrator, because it's like, oh, I'm just a dime a dozen skater. I have no real hopes of making it, blah, blah, blah. But when you go back and rewatch it, you're like, you're the top male skater in Japan. What the fuck are you talking about? And the whole show deals with his anxiety and his depression, and it's feeding into that as an unreliable, narrator technique is just beautiful. Like when that's what you want to expose, that's what you want to explore about your character's psychology. It's a beautiful tool to highlight that. And the other point I forgot to mention was for me, it's actually quite Shakespearean, the technique of you only learn about other characters through other characters' opinions. Like that's textbook Shakespeare. The only reason you know about such and such is tainted knowledge, because this character, it comes out into an audience and he's like, oh, such and such, yeah, no, he's bad news for X, Y, and Z reasons. And it's only later in the play you're like, well, that guy clearly had an agenda for saying that. And all characters have an agenda for having opinions about everyone else. And I think the Bear's doing a little bit of that, in that, again, the only knowledge we have about Kami, the only knowledge we have about Sydney is tainted exposition from every other character's viewpoint. And that's wonderfully beautiful, wonderfully Shakespearean.
Yeah, and reflective of life too. I mean, like how can we really know ourselves but from, at least partially, from the perspective of other people, like everyone's got their own filter that they see things through. So, like it's always nice to have something reflected back and be like, no, you're onto something here.
But it's that beautiful echo chamber.
Yeah,
again, that the creative process that Paddy brought up. Like, how can we truly know? It's like, oh, well, these people said I'm good, but
maybe they're lying. Maybe they're just trying to make me feel better. Like,
that's anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll wrap up this podcast with one final question then, that we might not know the answer to, because we're self-doubting creatives. But as writers, and I love that you brought this up very early, both Alex and Paddy, but so how do we know to release the pressure valve, was the term I came up for it. So how can we enjoy a work that is aiming for this level of anxiety in the audience? Have you seen examples, or maybe in your own writing, that those moments of comfort and joy that we did recognize that the Bear does? What's your instinct towards, as a writer, how can you just find those moments to actually say, no, things are okay, so you can keep the audience hooked and not completely alienate them?
Humor is a really, really good way to do it, and the Bear does that masterfully. Like, it's just a release, like a pressure valve is a perfect example, because like, what happens when everything's really tense? Someone makes a joke, because making a joke makes things even just very briefly, but like biologically, when you're laughing, you actually physically can't feel bad. Like it's so it's just a really good way of doing that. So working jokes into things, like I said, the Bear does that really well.
The Bear is funny.
It is very funny. It's very funny.
Alex, were you thinking of Stephen King when you said that?
Not really, because I actually don't think he's very funny. To be real with you. Yeah.
But he does use humor as a release valve a lot, I think.
Occasionally.
I've only read his short stories. You've read more than me, but I'm thinking back to some particular short stories where everything's awful and a character will make a joke, like a gallows humor sort of joke. And
No, you're right. You're right. I've thought about this a fair bit, but I just don't think I think his version of humor is like a little bloodless, to be honest. Like, it's effective in that sense that you're talking about, but like I never think of him as like doing funny. I've never laughed out loud reading a Stephen King story.
Stephen King, we still love you. Please still come on the podcast.
Yeah. No, I think he's great. He's a great storyteller. But anyway.
My thought was, so you've got the big overarching tension and you've got the little tensions as well. There's the big overarching anxiety of, will the restaurant succeed? But in any given scene, there's like a little intercharacter tension, or there's a little tension of, will they get the eggs done on time? Well, that's a random example, whatever it is. Even though obviously the big overarching tension doesn't get resolved until the end of the season or show or whatever it is, I think the little ones do need to resolve. If you're going to set up the tension, it's a promise that there's going to be some kind of resolution, even if it's small. So it seems to me wise to, you want to release the tension every now and again, but only do that once the little current tension has some sort of resolution. Even if it's going to continue later on, you need some sort of like and then they argued, and then they decided to compromise, and then something else caught on fire and it had to be come back to later, So resolve the little things as you go.
That's a really good point, because the only critique I had of The Bear season 3 is I don't think it quite did that. Because season 1 was very elegant in that there was clear closure in where the sandwich shop version of the restaurant got to.
Yep.
Season 2 had excellent closure in that they've managed to revamp the restaurant. They managed to get through the reconstruction.
Yeah.
Season 3 doesn't have a clear endpoint. Season 3 is look, we've got the Sydney problem, we've got the Kami Richie problem, we've got the Claire problem. Nat's having a baby. I mean, okay, that one gets resolved. And then it's like the review and general reception of the new restaurant. And season 3 closes none of those big arcs. It just suddenly goes cliffhanger bang. And it punches you in the face more than I thought season 1 and 2 were very elegant, lovely closure. Yes, I want to come back for more,
very clean. Yeah.
Season 3 goes, that was so rude. Now we have to wait for the next season.
Especially when there's so much anxiety, and an anxiety, like, even though when watching The Bear we're enjoying it, it's also partly kind of an unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
I think if they're going to give us that unpleasantness, we need the little cookie of the reward for the unpleasantness of like, okay, but now we saw the resolution. This is cleaned up. Now we can go to the next stomach churning thing. And if it didn't have that, if those little things weren't resolved, I don't think I would find it as satisfying.
It's the little moments.
It is the little moments.
Oh, well, that's beautiful.
It is.
All right. I think that we've dissected the bear as we promised. We
vivisected it.
Oh dear.
What? Deconstructed? That's the word for when a meal.
Oh yeah, very good.
Deconstructed bear.
Very good.
We have deconstructed the bear. We got some elements over here, elements over here. Beautiful. Alex, would you like to take us out with a quote?
Oh boy.
I would, Ali. I would. Yes. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. And that's by Seneca. Good old ancient
good old
philosopher.
Seneca.
Yeah, good old Seneca. He's got a great book called On the Shortness of Time, actually, which I recommend.
Oh, I can't wait for his next work.
Yeah.
This has been Pros and Cons. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate our podcast, send us fan mail. You can do that now through multiple different channels. You can go on our website if it exists and email us. And find us on socials, and we have a book that's called The New Mythic that we managed not to. No, we did mention it. No,
we did. Not by name, but we did.
There's an audiobook version of it. There's an ebook.
Yeah.
You can physically buy it. Go and rate that one on Goodreads or Amazon, and just be nice or don't say anything.
Yeah.
Remember what your mother said. If you don't have anything nice to say, shut up.
There we go.
Dial your mother up to 11.
Maybe we should call that the episode, Dial Your Mother to 11.
The bear colon dialing your mother to 11.
Signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.